Thanks for downloading a 3CR podcast. 3CR is an independent community radio station based in Melbourne, Australia. We need your financial support to keep going. Go to www.3cr.org.au for more information and to donate online. Now stay tuned for your 3CR podcast.
But you also had people that were very fine people. Very fine people on both sides.
And the aliens would mind meld and give them the technology. They're bad aliens. So are you surprised the Nazis were influenced by demons?
No, if demons are real, I would definitely think they'd be on the side of the Nazis.
Yeah.
McDonald's is connected to the Clintons. They chop up the bodies and put them into the sausage and hamburgers. People are being cannibalized. Look it up.
And I'm watching CNN talk about this as violent white nationalist protests. We have done everything in our power to keep this peaceful, you know?
It's Pepe's become kind of a symbol.
Welcome to Yeah Nah Pasaran, a show about fascism and its gravediggers. I'm Cam Smith.
I'm Andy Fleming.
And this week we are joined by journalist Kate Burns, an expert on Christo-fascism located in Los Angeles. Kate, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having us, guys.
I guess just to begin with, it's been 100 days plus a few, give or take, of Trump in office.
Yeah.
Has Christ returned? How's it all going for the Christo-fascists?
Christ hasn't returned yet, but they are definitely making their best attempt for that to come about. I'm sure, well, it depends on how much you're following what Trump's doing. He posted himself as the Pope yesterday or the day before, so he's got a little bit of pushback from some Catholics at the moment, but the evangelicals and Christian nationalists as a whole are really going to be making the most of the 4 years that they've got with Trump in power, making impact on culture, policy, and just everyday existence for minorities.
The Pope thing I thought was sort of interesting and funny, but there's some extreme Catholics in the tent, like J.D. Vance possibly falls into that category.
Yeah, definitely, but he thinks it's funny. So anything that Trump does, there's not going to be any pushback from his Catholics within his team. But there was the New York Archbishop, I think it was yesterday, came back and pushed back on it. But it's more international pushback, really, from other countries, obviously saying that it's disrespectful. And like this whole thing is like obviously trolling to a certain point, but it's the president of the United States of America. Should we be trolling on Maine? I'm not really sure.
I was also thinking that there are people in the evangelical world who maybe don't like Catholics that much, and so it's sort of a bit of a weird message for them too.
It's definitely, look, there's a lot have been going on within the Christian nationalist movement. Obviously, a lot of them rallying together under banners of one nation under God, meaning one true God, all of that kind of stuff. And I think that there's always been beef between the Catholics and the Christian nationalists. We're definitely seeing that sort of break a little bit more at the moment as evangelicals believe that their belief and their understanding is the one true way.
And Kate, have the Christian nationalists been successful in climbing the mountain known as Washington?
Yeah, definitely. Look, if you only have to look at his cabinet and House of the Speaker, Mike Johnson, he's as Christian nationalist as it comes. Yeah, throughout his whole entourage of folks, you've got Pete Hegseth. He's obviously armed with the tattoos of Christian nationalists. And then you've got like the whole Heritage Foundation in there, all of the other conservative think tanks, the likes of Tucker Carlson and all of that kind of crew, they all fall under that as well. And we've already seen a huge impact in Washington. Sean Foyt, who is a Christian nationalist, he's an evangelical. He sort of like is swept in with the New Apostolic Reformation, but also he's heavily linked in with like Trump's team. So last week, the National Faith Advisory Board, led by Paula Cain-White, they invited Sean to worship in the White House with a couple of hundred of pastors from around America. So they're definitely making inroads. Sean Foyt, again, is old friends, as he says, with Pete Hegseth, and Pete has invited him to worship in the Pentagon. So there's definitely a lot of their presence, and that will continue to have impact on policy.
Kate, you mentioned the new Apostolic Reformation, which we shall henceforth call, let's just call it NAR or NAR going forward. Could you perhaps explain to our listeners what is that Reformation?
So the NAR are basically like their own arm of Christianity. So think of like Catholics, evangelicals, NAR. So they believe that America, woke societies are led by high-level demons and spirits. And how NAR works, there's apostles and prophets, and God speaks to them. And so he will have a chat with them and say, hey, let's ban gay marriage or something. And they will then share that with their flock. And then that creates what Matthew Taylor, a scholar of the Christian National Movement, calls spiritual memes. And so that will come from the top, which is like Cheyenne, Lou Engle, Cindy Jacobs, Dutch Sheets, and then Paula White-Cain herself, who is Trump's personal apostle. And so God speaks to them, they spread their message through their flock, and then that meme travels. So saying that God said that we need to ban queer folks from society. So then that will then spread through the community, and they have churches all over the world, but obviously a huge presence in America. And the type of Christians that you see around Trump in the White House, they're evangelicals and a huge presence of NAR. And so they believe in the Seven Mountains, along with a wider swath of evangelicals as well. And the Seven Mountains of Influence, as they call it, or the Seven Spheres of Influence, it is religion, family, education, government, media, arts and entertainment, and business. And their idea is that prophets, apostles, or nominated true believers of the NAR teachings is that they will be the ones leading government. They'll be leading the arts and entertainment. And when we think about that, I think about what's going on at the Kennedy Center in DC. Obviously, they're going hard after education at the moment. They're bringing Christian teachings in the Bible, the Ten Commandments into schools. And it's concerning because they are actually having real impact. There was a lot of influence on Project 2025 from NAR too, and we've seen how that's rolled out. There was obviously a lot of discussion about Project 2025 prior to the election, and Trump, pretended he had nothing to do with it. And you even had some talk through the Democrats. Is it real? Are we overplaying it? Well, we've seen like 2/3 of that already being implemented in the first 100 days.
Kate, you recently, in an article, quoted an NAR person, Ross Johnston from California, Will Be Saved, and the Her Voice movement. He said that they're already known as Christian white nationalists, so they might as well start acting like it. Yeah. I guess, is that a fair representation of the demographics at play?
Definitely. I think what we're seeing, though, and definitely the data post-2024 election, one of the, you would say yes, so predominantly white Christian nationalists and white NAR community. However, Cheyenne, one of the leaders himself, he has a huge Asian community throughout the world. And so one of the things that we noticed in the lead up to the election this year, Sean Foyt, Ross, Jenny Donnelly, all the people that are out on the street doing these rallies, is that they actually brought in translators in probably the last year to 6 months as they were going around the country. So they had Spanish speaking, Korean, Mandarin. And so they realized that they needed to engage more people than just white people, right? And historically, Mexico has a lot of Catholics, a lot of Christians, so they can be swept up in that with it as well. And we definitely saw that there is a much bigger presence of other minorities this time around. And as the community continues to build, there is a discussion like, when do we stop calling them white Christian nationalists now that there is so many people within that space, but still predominantly, I would say. And For Ross Johnson, who was ex-California Be Saved, and now he's joined Jenny Donnelly, and they're doing May Day, which actually kicks off tomorrow in New York. Their following is a lot of white folks. However, they did a big rally in DC in October, and there was tens of thousands of people there. Like, this is not a small section, and they're not just rallying small numbers. Like, they had the whole of the Washington Mall locked out, and there was, like I said, tens of thousands of people there. So they're definitely gaining momentum. And for Ross to come out and say, like, we're white Christian nationalists, you better behave like one, like, that's who they are. I think even with some of these minorities as well, like, you'll see, I'll get a lot of questions from folks, and they're like, well, why are these people following them? And it's like, I think it's that they do believe in the same teachings, and they do believe in an element of white supremacy. Anyone can believe in that. Like, you think of Nick Fuentes, for God's sakes. There's plenty of people that can hold these beliefs, which is super concerning. But for the Republican Party, that's how they know that they can win, is with the religious vote, the religious right.
Kate, in addition to gaining access to those in high office,
Mm-hmm.
the NAR and figures like Foyt seem extraordinarily active. There's just this constant agitation going on. Can you elaborate a little more on what these groups do and how they try to spread their message and their appeal on the streets?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things, obviously, with Christian nationalists. You have policymakers, there's millions of the Trump's cabinet from the Heritage Foundation and everything, but there's a lot of pieces to the Christian right movement, right? And how the GOP taps into that and motivates them to get out to vote. And one of the things for the likes of Sean Foyt and Jenny Donnelly and Ross Johnson, Joel Mott, these kind of folks, they've really seen traction in hitting the streets. So essentially, like, taking church from outside the pulpit and taking it out onto the streets. You know, like I said, with May Day, like, they're kicking off in New York tomorrow on Times Square, they definitely target areas that are liberal strongholds, as you would say, essentially, because they want to create confrontation. So there's one part of it. They want to create content, and they want to have people protesting them, yelling at them, whatever it is, because that to them proves that there's demons and spiritual warfare going on. The other part is to take up territory, and they use that a lot when they're talking about the Seven Mountain Mandate, and when we're in the period of revival, as they say we are as at the moment, is that taking up territory is physically taking up space in a city centre or wherever they're holding this rally, right? So Sean Foyt and his crew, they'll target Los Angeles, West Hollywood, New York. They'll go into liberal areas on all of the West Coast, Portland. And it is for the confrontation, but it's also for that presence. So they feel like they're physically taking up space in these liberal areas, as they see evil areas. And then they're seeing a lot of recruitment through that, because with these street events, a lot of it's to do with like worship music and prayer and laying hands and giving away smoking and drugs and all of this kind of stuff. And they have a altar call, and people throw up their cigarettes and their vapes and whatever. But it's about them feeling like they're being seen in these urban environments, right? And the bonus is that they get content.
Kate, you also recently wrote about Sean Foyt and his dalliances with Russell Brand.
Yeah. So when Russell was coming up in the UK, I was living in the UK. I moved to London when I was 18, went to school there. And that was when Russell was coming up with MTV, and he was doing the reports out at raves and things like that. So I followed Russell's career, and obviously he took a sharp turn around the time that the first allegations of sexual assault and rape came out, going back, what is it, a year and a half, 2 years now. And then that has only continued to get worse. So during COVID, obviously it was just, he was essentially going down the right-wing cooker road, but then he found Christ. And as obviously in the last couple of weeks we've seen that the charges have been laid against him in the UK, So obviously finding Jesus at a very convenient time. And I didn't expect that Sean and Russell would connect, but it was inauguration night at one of the many parties around DC for Trump's win. Foyt posted a picture of him and Russell and jaw on the floor. Obviously, it was sort of going that way, but to see them together. And so they caught up then they did a podcast episode together. Russell has many podcasts, and one of them that airs on Rumble is called Break Bread. And essentially that's where he brings in American Christian leaders and they talk about their faith, and past guests, the likes of Tucker Carlson. So very right-wing Christian folks coming in and talking about how they're God's own true God and everything along those lines. When they recorded their episode, obviously I tuned in. So it was really interesting to see how they whitewashed each other. Like for Sean Foyt, obviously he's not the leader. He's one of the leaders in the movement over here. And to see, but his closeness with Trump and DeSantis and Paula White-Cain essentially. So essentially he's like giving Russell like this blessing, right? That he's part of our fold now and he's repented and he's been saved and all of this. But on the flip side, Russell really whitewashed Sean. So Sean is openly anti-LGBTQ mafia, as he calls it, anti-abortion. He's a hater, specifically really anti-trans. And he's been this way forever, right? And so when he caught up with Russell on this podcast, there was only one mention of Sean's bigoted opinions, and it was when Sean was talking about when he ran for Congress in 2019. And essentially it was something like, oh, well, I wasn't running against like hardline Republicans. I was running against like the woke elitists that believe in like chopping kids' body parts off. And Russell's only response to that was, wow. So I think they served each other in that whitewashing piece, and Russell has a huge following. There was a report done by Media Matters probably about a month ago that showed how much content is right-wing content and how big their followings are. And Russell was sitting in there at number 4 behind Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, and I can't remember, Joe Rogan, obviously. And so I think it's like 22.5 million followers. And I suppose my concern as someone that is fluent in Sean Foyt is that he may look like a happy, shiny Jesus person and he can pretend that, but he is not that. He's very, very, very radical, very extremist, and he's had direct impact in policy. And now Brand is giving him this platform across many countries, not just within America. Obviously, there's a lot of people that follow Brand in Australia and New Zealand and the UK. So that's concerning. And it doesn't just end there, because they are teaming up in a couple of weeks and they're going to be doing mass water baptisms in Florida together. So that will be a treat for the eyes and ears.
Kate, in regards to figures like Sean Foyt and Russell Brand having an international audience, Sean has visited Israel, as I understand it.
Mm-hmm.
What's the position, or how outspoken are figures like this on the current conflict?
Oh, openly, hugely. Sean especially. Look, you've got the Christian nationalists and evangelicals believe in the second coming of Christ. So they believe for the second coming to come about, that all Jews need to move back into Israel, and then the second coming will come and there will be a small portion of Jews that are saved that convert to Christianity, and then the rest of the Jews and the Muslims will die. So since October 7th, traditionally Sean's always talking about save the children, and with his mission, he goes into devastated areas, whether it's war-torn or whether it's after earthquakes or natural disasters. And he's always talking about supporting kids and everything like that. And obviously since October 7th, there has not been a peep from his mouth about anything that's going on there, and even Palestinian Christians. He doesn't have any sympathy or even worth mentioning their name, right? So it was about October last year, Sean went on a live and he was talking about a way we could reframe what's happening in the Middle East by thinking about it as we're coming to the end of the story and that all of this conflict is bringing on the second coming. And so in their minds, this is a good thing, right? Because they're starting to see the shift to the end of the world that they believe in and they want to bring about. So in their minds, this is the beginning of the end and this is what they pray for. And definitely from tracking all of his social medias, especially on Instagram, there's a lot of people that are calling him out, obviously with all of the deaths, especially in the Palestinian Christian community. They totally there was a story early on, still in early 2024, I think, about how Israel attacked the compound of the Christian church there and killed 2 people. And yeah, not a peep. Whereas Sean will be rolling around talking about how they're persecuted in America and all of these kind of things and how Christian persecution is on the rise. But they just have a total blinkers on for that particular persecution, which I would say would be the worst if you're getting bombed by Israel. But Sean went on a trip, a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago now, and he went with his Let Us Worship movement. He took his family and some of his biggest donors, as well as Greg Locke. I don't know if you're familiar with Greg Locke. He's a pastor that talks about burning witches, and he actually did a whole book burning. God, it would have been almost a couple of years ago now. He burnt Harry Potter, witch books, and woke ideology books or something. So he went as well, and they hired a venue that had like the Mount of Olives in the background. So that's essentially where Jesus is supposed to return. So they thought when they were there, and obviously Sean vocalized it, that if they prayed hard enough, maybe Jesus would return today. He didn't, unfortunately. They did try really hard though, but they were actually joined by the mayor of Jerusalem, which is Fleur. I can't think of her name off the top of my head, but she was there. And it was really interesting because Sean's persecution complex and everything that goes along with it. Fleur herself, when Israel attacked the Christian compound in Gaza early on in the genocide, she went on to a radio station in the UK and said that there were no Christians in Gaza and there was no churches in Gaza because Hamas had gotten rid of all of them. And I just find that, it never ceases to amaze me, the depths and the partnerships they'll make with people for the means to an end. And yeah, it was seeing them in Israel, and Sean claims that it was the first open air worship session for Christians since October 7th. We couldn't confirm or deny that. Sean says a lot of things, so it's hard to confirm, but it was definitely for them having that presence there and their want to bring that upon the times, right? To bring on that second coming. So they feel that physical presence and that commitment of traveling out there will help bring that on.
Kate, a Harry Potter book burning seems very quaint in 2025. Surely the mold in J.K. Rowling's house and the effect it's had upon her,
Look, this was before when Greg Locke burnt the books, and because he's in Texas, obviously, and that was full uncoming of JK. Look, she blocked me years ago. I've been blocked from her for calling out her atrocious beliefs. But I think this was put before that kind of seeped into the right wing's ecosystem, right? So they think anything to do with witchcraft, magic, that's old, satanic panic stuff. So they still bring in that older stuff, but then they'll bring in education books and sexual health books and anything that all of the book bannings that's been happening in the US recently. But yes, simpler times when they were burning Harry Potter books, that's for sure.
Kate, we've just had an election in Australia, and it appears that insofar as the coalition was aligned with it, Trumpism has been soundly rejected. What do you say to the relations between the kinds of figures you discussed in the United States and Australia and the influence of Christian nationalism on the right here in Australia?
Yeah, for sure. So obviously Trump's had the magic effect for Canada and Australia. Obviously people have been watching America in horror with everything that's been going on in the first 100 days, and to see both Canada and Australia stand up to that is really exciting. Obviously, though, we have a lot of work to do with both governments and supporting what's going on in Gaza and the West Bank. However, with the US involvement, so there's definitely an effort to connect with Australian churches. Like we saw Sean go out, it was 2 years ago now, he went to Australia and he met up with Daniel Hagee of 5 churches on the Gold Coast, and they did water baptisms and they held an event. But you've also got Charlie Kirk of TPUSA that has been tapping shoulders of Australian pastors. And one of them in particular is from Echo Church in Sydney. And they have been flying Andrew Sedra and his wife out to preach at Turning Point USA events. So there was AmFest, which is America Festival, at the end of last year. He came out to that. He's spoken in Florida several times. I think probably the biggest difference and the safety net that Australia has in comparison to the US is the voting system and also the education system. There's been a war against the education system in the US for decades. This isn't something that's just come about in the last 100 days since Trump's been in power. The right have been working to chip away at education in the US for a really long time. And so that includes like media literacy, all of these kind of things. The other part of the voting system is obviously it's compulsory to vote in Australia. In the US, it is not. So you only get a certain portion of America that actually votes, traditionally, not even just last year. And one of the things that the right are really good at, obviously they do gerrymandering and redlining and all of that kind of stuff. But the other thing is that they disengage the opposition. So they spend millions on ads to disengage people on the left and liberals to not vote, right? So that's where I probably see the biggest difference in how like a government like Trump and leader like Trump and all his cronies get into power is because they have a very engaged population between the Christians, evangelicals, NAR and the Catholics, and they really work to get them out to vote, and then they spend a lot of money trying to disengage other communities to not vote, right? So I think that that's the saving grace. However, the likes of Kirk and Foyt, they have a lot of money and they have a lot of people backing their movements. And I do see, like, there's a lot of things that have formed America to be this susceptible to a leader like Trump, right? Obviously, late stage capitalism, we're in a really bad place in America, and we have been in for a really long time. And so when you see people and communities that are underserved, obviously it's economically tight, more people turn to religion, right, of many shapes and forms. But the thing that they make very attractive in Christian nationalism is it's a political ideology. It's not a framework of the Bible. It's a political ideology, right? So they then preach to the culture wars. And so I suppose, is it happening in Australia tomorrow? Obviously not, right? But as the income gaps increases in Australia, as more natural disasters take place, as more as the communities are being pulled apart, you will see an increase. And I do believe that there are these folks that are definitely eyeing it off and investing. There's no way that they would be investing the money that they're investing going out and doing tours in Australia or consistently bringing Australian pastors into the US unless that they thought that eventually that they would be able to have an impact. And I think that one thing that the Republicans, I will always give them props for this, they know how to play the long game. They are not short-sighted. Like, they went after Roe versus Wade and it took them 50 years. And that was their objective as a movement, right? So I think that as a whole, Foyt and Kirk and that, they're Christian supremacists. It's not only like nationalists. They believe that the good word needs to be spread across the world. And so that's why you get a lot of missionary work, and missionary work goes back to the origins of Australia, right? So missionaries were sent out to spread the word, and they're still doing that today. So they are not happy with America. That's not what they want. They're happy to have America, but they want more than that. So especially in the way that they treat countries will be different. So for Africa and Turkey and the likes, they will be there supporting them and making them convert to Christianity. But their approach will be different in Western predominantly white countries, right? Because they want to shift that power and they want to see godly people leading these spheres. Again, going back to like religion, family, education, government, they want people leading around the world to be in line with them because it makes international working together a lot easier if they're all speaking the same language, right? So I think we've got to watch the increase of right-wing populist sentiments in Australia. Obviously, you get a lot of our rubbish being fed through the likes of Telegram, WhatsApp, all of those channels, Signal. And I think it's just something that has to be watched, because what you'll see is we have a lot of folks in Australia that are engaged in culture war nonsense, right? But the religion portion hasn't come in yet, right? But if the wage, the gap in between resources and everything continues to expand, more people will turn to religion.
Well, Kate, lots to look forward to.
Sorry. Look, this isn't tomorrow. Don't worry, guys. I just think I always encourage folks back into Australia. Sure, you look at America and you go, God, that's crazy. And they're crazy over there. But don't think you're immune to it, right? So, yes, America's long-standing history of Christian nationalism and a high population of engaged Christians, right? But these things can happen, and you've got to look at how it teams up with the right-wing media space. You think of Fox News, what it does in America, and everyone's wearing a cross and everyone's speaking about godly ways and them Christian morals and things like that. Once that starts to seep into each other in Australia, that's when we've got to start thinking about it, right? So I think I just always encourage Australians, like, no, it's not happening today. It's not America. However, just be aware of these movements growing, right? And I suppose especially like within your friends and family groups, it's just making sure that we're educating each other on what these movements are, who's supporting them, what are their end goals, because if you ignore it, it does take hold. And like we've obviously seen that here. So I think it's just really strengthening our communities in Australia around different aspects. Sure, if people want to go to church, that's great. But let's just make sure it's not going into one of these really radicalized churches that are anti-democratic, that are anti-pluracy, that are anti-freedom religion, right? So I think it's just having that in the back of your mind, because if you think you're not susceptible to it, that you're more susceptible to it if you think you aren't. It's like anything with any kind of cult or any kind of like high power environment. We have to be aware.
Well, if listeners want to keep up to date on this stuff, they can follow you on Blue Sky, Kate RQ Burns, and your writing is also available on leftcoastrightwatch.org. Kate, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Well, Andy, that is our program. We will be back next week. See you then.
See you then.
It's flu season. What will you choose? A little time to go out and get a jab, or a lot of time recovering from the flu? A sore arm or infected lungs? A little discomfort now or a lot of pain later? Don't risk the flu. Protect your mob with an annual flu jab, free for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people aged 6 months and older. Book with your doctor or local Aboriginal community-controlled health organisation. Visit betterhealth.vic.gov.au/get-vaccinated. Authorised by the Victorian Government, Melbourne.
A 3CR supporter. You might have heard about the Community Radio Plus app, but it's only when you start using it that you'll wonder how you lived without it.
You can listen to us wherever you are, at home, work, driving,
on public transport, gardening, protesting, or even in the bath.
Just search Community Radio Plus wherever you get your app.